Sergeant Gray?
Great, Ray. How are you?
Good. Thank you. Maybe we can start. Can I call you Kendall?
Kendall would be great.
Oh, great. So, Kendall, how long have you worked for the city of Salinas? When did you start, and your position now? What are your general responsibilities?
So I started in 1999. So I'm coming up on 19 years with the city. Right now, I'm a sergeant of our Special Operations Unit. So we do a lot of different things in the Special Operations Unit, one of them being abandoned vehicles, but we have 10 community service officers in the unit. So we have some on patrol in the daytime, some patrol in the evenings. We also have an abandoned vehicle unit. And then my position does other things like staff special events, for the police department's perspective, review alcohol license applications, and different things like that.
You're busy. Yes.
Very busy. We have a lot going on.
So you're working not just 5 days a week. You got people going full time all through the weekend as well, right?
We have 7-day-a-week coverage,
Right.
days and nights.
Right. That's great.
Yes.
We have a lot of cars in our city, and there were a lot of issues with parking, but also the result of that is abandoned vehicles. So how do we define under our code what an abandoned vehicle is?
So there's different codes that we use.
Right.
We have city codes, we have the California Vehicle Code, and we also fall under the Monterey County Vehicle Abatement Authority, which is like an agreement between the different agencies in Monterey County that are participating. So we have different codes that we look at, but essentially an abandoned vehicle could be a vehicle left more than 10 days or abandoned in what we would typically think as abandoned, but it could also be other things. It could be a vehicle that has been stripped or no wheels and missing major parts out of its motor and dumped on the street, and there's no time limit on that one. But it could also be some other things. We look for different criteria in evaluating whether something's abandoned. We look for different indications.
Okay.
So,
but it is under the state and local codes that abandoned vehicles are defined.
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
How does that work? How do you address the issue of the abandoned vehicles in our city?
Abandoned vehicles is like you brought up earlier, it's a huge issue in
Right.
Salinas, and as the streets get more crowded with vehicles and parking becomes a premium, it becomes more of a problem for neighbors that may not have reported this vehicle, but
Right.
since there's no parking on, in all areas of town, we're getting more reports.
Right.
There's different ways to report them. They can email us, they can leave a phone message, or they can report it online or in the new Salinas Connect
Great.
app. So there's different ways that the public can report these, and I would definitely like to go into that a little bit further.
We can do that. So just give us a scope, abandoned vehicles is a very significant, large problem in our community. Hundreds of cars, thousands of cars, are we caught up? Is there a backlog? And maybe you can give a sort of a range of what we used to have and what we have today in terms of the challenges for, enforcing the code to address these abandoned vehicles.
Definitely. So last year we were at a point where we're over 700 complaints down.
Wow.
And a lot of our abandoned vehicle complaints weren't getting addressed. It could be over a month before we responded to that call, and that's not acceptable. We expect more. We want to be better, and our residents expect more. So that's where we were at. We did some restructuring, and we put some more resources into it, and we've definitely improved. But I did pull some numbers before this meeting that I'd like to share. So. In 2015, we had about 2,800 abandoned vehicle investigations that we conducted in 2015. We towed 164 cars that year. It's gone up each year. So 2016, we had almost 4,000 complaints and towed over 400 cars. So almost double.
Right.
2017, over 5,000, and we towed 700 cars.
Wow.
This year, it's increasing every year.
Yeah.
This year, I ran our numbers as of year to date, and then I calculated that out what we can project for the full year based on what we've done so far.
Right.
We're on pace for 7,200 complaints this year,
Wow.
up from 3,000 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
We're on pace to tow almost 1,300 cars. And now we're actually doing some more proactive work,
Right.
Because we put a little bit more resources. So we're proactively able to get some the obvious ones before they're reported, and we're on pace to tow about 350 proactive ones.
So you mark the car, you cite the car. How does the owner, or maybe you don't know who the owner is, how does that issue get addressed?
So some cars we won't even mark.
Right.
Like I said, if a car's been stripped or it's missing its engine,
Right.
or it's expired over 6 months, we can tow those instantly.
Okay.
So some vehicles we won't mark, we'll tow them on the spot.
Right.
Other cars we mark, and what we hope is that the vehicle gets moved.
Right.
We're not looking to to tow everybody's car.
Right.
We want people to move their cars like the vehicle code says they should every 72 hours,
Right.
and not store their vehicle on the street long term.
Right.
Or not have vehicles in the street that aren't registered or missing parts that make them operable. So the vehicles that we do tow, the next business day we send a letter in the mail to the registered owner, letting them know that their vehicle's been towed. So every car we tow, we send a letter in the mail to the registered owner,
Right.
that their vehicle's been towed.
So, you might tow several hundred, but you may have several thousands of calls and requests for addressing these issues.
Yes.
So, when you do have a tow, how does that work? Do you work with towing companies? Who gets selected? How does that part of the abandoned vehicle, enforcement? How's that handled?
So our city has an agreement with tow companies.
Okay.
I want to say there's about 9 of them on our list. And whenever any officer needs a tow, abandoned vehicles or police officers needs a tow, they call dispatch.
Okay.
And dispatch works off a list, and they'll send the next tow company that's on the list.
Right.
to
So they
respond.
rotate. All right.
They rotate.
Okay.
Yes.
So, and then let's say it's day 10, they're cited, nothing's done. Then you call the tow company?
It would depend on the vehicle.
Okay.
So like I said, there's some that we can tow instantly.
Right.
There's other ones, the Monterey County Vehicle Abatement Authority, we work off the 4-point system.
Uh-huh.
And points are indicators that the vehicle's abandoned, and the more indicators it gets, the more points it adds up.
Okay.
So there's other towing authorities that we use. There's 2 abandoned vehicle tow authorities, but there's also 2 other towing authorities that are more commonly used.
Okay.
One of that is expired over 6 months, and the other one's parked in the same place for over 72 hours.
Okay.
So if the vehicle's expired over 6 months or parked for over 72 hours, and it meets other conditions to
Right.
get it up to the 4 points, we tow it as an AV, but under those towing authorities.
Okay.
So some of the other indications could be that it's not being driven.
Right.
Could be spider webs
Right.
attached on the vehicle. It could be debris underneath, like leaves accumulating under the tires. It could be a dirty windshield, which would show that it's not driving. There's lots of different possible indicators of an abandoned vehicle. So that's the community service officer's job would be to go out and evaluate all of these
Okay.
different things and conduct their investigation.
So it's not just cars, it could be trucks and different kinds of trucks, large vehicles, including recreation vehicles as well?
It could be anything, really.
Yeah.
So we get a lot of complaints on recreational vehicles. We get complaints on trailers, people storing their trailers in the street. Could be a boat.
Oh, wow.
It could. We've recently gotten some complaints on some large box trucks that are being used, for produce,
Uh-huh.
or business vehicles that they're storing out in the street. So we get complaints on all different kinds of vehicles.
Right. So what about some of these big, huge semi-trucks that get parked? I mean, they're supposed to only be there for no longer than 72 hours consistently, over time. But if they're past 72 hours, do they fit the criteria for being towed?
Yes. So
Okay.
any vehicle any vehicle is subject to 72 hours,
Right.
regardless of what it is. It needs to move every 72 hours.
Right. Are recreational vehicles becoming more of a problem now? I noticed in Monterey County on the peninsula, they had an issue with Lapis Road and lots of vehicles parked there. Many people that may be almost homeless or are homeless.
So we get a lot of reports for recreational vehicles, especially in residential neighborhoods where they're parked, in front of somebody's house. A lot of times there could be trash accumulated. I know of a couple cases where the recreational vehicles didn't run, and they were kind of being used as a little party room where different people could come in and do different things. So it really causes some problems in some neighborhoods.
Right.
We've also had some that leak sewage.
Right.
From underneath because the tanks are full or something of that nature. So we do get a lot of calls about recreational vehicles.
Right. That's not the norm, though. I mean, you do get a lot of calls, but usually it's a car or a small truck.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And what happens with the larger vehicles? Are the towing companies able to, do they have the capacity and the equipment to tow the larger vehicles?
Some tow companies do. I'm not up on all the towing in itself as a whole is a whole other complicated issue. But I do know that for safety reasons, certain tow trucks can only take vehicles that weigh a certain amount or are a certain height. Okay. So like a flatbed truck may not be able to take a really tall RV because it's sitting on the flatbed, and that would raise the overall height to an unsafe height, or the vehicle can't handle the weight.
Okay.
So to answer your question, some of the smaller RVs or smaller trailers could be towed by most tow vehicles, but we don't force, we wouldn't force a tow truck driver to tow something that's unsafe.
Right.
So they would evaluate based on the capacity of their vehicle.
Okay, and that may force another tow company to come that has the capacity to take care of the problem.
Yes.
Okay. So are you able to look at the data that you're generating with the request and the number of vehicles that are abandoned, that are towed? Can you, analyze it to certain areas of the city, or is it just all over the city of Salinas?
That's a great question. So we break it down by beats.
Okay.
So police beats.
Right.
So in the city of Salinas, we have 12 police beats. So we're currently transitioning into a new records keeping system with Salinas Connect.
Right.
So previously we could analyze it by beat, which gets it down pretty close to where the problems are occurring. But I would say we have abandoned vehicle complaints across the city. But with Salinas Connect, we're going to be able to pinpoint it on a map and really get down and see where those hot spots are.
Right. So that connects, Salinas Connect also has a mapping, what they call a GIS system. So you can actually look at which neighborhood, which block, which street, specifically which part of the street that vehicle problem was, where it occurred.
Yes.
Wow. So do you look at that monthly, Kendall, or?
I go in there more than once a month.
Okay.
So what I like as a supervisor is I can go into Salinas Connect and I can look at the complaints, but I can organize them chronologically. So I can organize them in that fashion so I can see what the oldest ones are, and I can kind of get in there and look and say, hey, why haven't we done anything with this one? This one's a couple weeks old, or whatever the case might be. It's easier to do that as a supervisor and as a line staff that's working their complaints. They can see what the oldest ones are and make sure that we get those so we're not falling behind.
So on Salinas Connect, that's a relatively new citizens request management system. And citizens themselves could access it through the application, or as I understand it, on our city website. Or you will then get the request directly through that connection, and then it's up to whoever the officer that's handling that day or time to respond to the request, right?
Yes.
And normally, what's the time frame for you? You get a call in the morning, it's filed through Salinas Connect, you see the prompt, you got a call, you got a where and the what, and the location is? Then what do you do?
So in the past, they would get added to a list
Wow.
that day, and then the next day the list would get printed out for the folks. But what we're hoping with Salinas Connect, we're planning on getting some iPads soon,
Great.
where the officers can actually work their lists out in the field.
Ah.
So they could hit the streets at, say,
Right.
9 in the morning. Somebody makes a report at 10:30. That officer's working out there, and that would pop up in the iPad while they're working their list. So it's really gonna speed things up.
Right.
And it'll help us get to a better location, because Salinas Connect will use the pinpoint
Yeah.
geographic location,
Right.
and it gets us a little bit closer. Also, another good thing about Salinas Connect for residents and for us is that they can take a picture
Oh,
in the
right.
app and attach that picture to their complaint. Before, most of our complaints were coming in on voicemail, and a voicemail could be, there's a gray Honda on such and such street,
Right.
and the officer gets there, and of course there's probably 6 gray Hondas there, and he's like, okay, well, which one?
Right.
And people get upset when we mark, their car, or we mark the wrong car.
Right.
That tends to upset people. So with Salinas Connect, I think it'll get us closer to it'll get us to the correct complaints
Right.
quicker.
Right.
Than
So
the other
almost
way.
real time. So you
Yeah.
can almost be there sometimes minutes or hours, depending on, where they're working in the city and where some of these officers are located. They might be able to take care of it instantly or within a few hours.
As we're working the complaint, we'll update that complaint. And if the resident chooses so, they can get a text or an email with how we're working that complaint.
Right.
And we keep them in the loop of what we're doing. So
So
they know.
if a citizen uses the app or the web and, it comes in the morning, sometime during the day they get a response or, we're working on it or it's something back to them, either however their preferred way of communicating, could be email, could be the phone, could be a text.
Yes.
Right. But normally you try to get back to that individual within hours or when they
I
first
would.
file. or
Well,
log
we
the
still have a
com-
lot of complaints,
Right.
and as you can see, we're going to be up to 7,200 this year.
Wow, yeah.
So I would like. I mean, I think it would be great if we could respond the same day to all the complaints, but it's not.
Right.
We're not there yet. So what I would like is within the same week we're
Okay.
beginning the process.
Right.
And depending on the specific vehicle, the process could be an instant tow, or it could take up to 10 days.
Right.
So ideally, I'd like the complaint to start being investigated that week and be marked or towed.
Right.
And then hopefully by the following week,
Right.
we can move it out of there.
Right. You coordinate the timing of the 10 days and other timing requirements in the abandoned vehicle code, so you're following along and responding as quickly as you can. But it's good to know that the response will be quicker, I think, and more complete if they use Salinas Connect as opposed to just calling in.
It will. Our staff spent a lot of time in the past listening to voicemails.
Right.
And a lot of people, they're not used to dealing with these type of things, so they may leave out pertinent information that
Right.
they won't with Salinas Connect, because it's prompting them to what we want. But also, some people can tend to talk for a long time before we get the correct information. So they spend a lot of time listening to the voicemails, and then they would write them down as the person's talking, and then they'd have to transfer what was written down into our database
Right.
and type that in. So it was very time consuming. So with Salinas Connect, they populate the information and we can update it.
Right.
We're going to spend less time in the office and more time
Right.
out on the street.
Right. So we're talking about abandoned vehicles or AVs in the right-of-way, basically. What happens if there's a complaint on, somebody's lawn or driveway or someplace on private property?
That's a great question. So the police department deals with complaints that are on public property or the
Right.
street. Code enforcement will deal with complaints on private property, a driveway, a yard, a backyard. So in the past, what we would do is we'd have to call the person back and say,
Right.
you need to make this report with code enforcement, or we would have to take the time to, communicate to code enforcement this complaint. Well, this should be yours. with Salinas Connect, we can actually reclassify complaints based on department. So it's really a lot quicker in getting the complaint to the right department, and it happens either way.
Yeah.
Sometimes code enforcement gets complaints that should be ours,
Right.
and vice versa. So pretty much with a click of a button, we can transfer that complaint to the right department so they can start working on it.
It sounds like the data that you will receive collectively, say, for a certain period of time, whether it's weekly or monthly, you will be able to look at some data and analyze that and help with your proactive efforts. Are you doing more in the proactive effort? I know it's always a staffing question and how busy you are with just the enforcement part. But
Yes. So I would say the proactive effort would fall under our community-oriented policing strategy at the police department. And our whole department has really shifted towards community-oriented policing.
Great.
And that filters out to all the different little areas. So in abandoned vehicles, one of the things that we're doing for community-oriented policing is really stepping up some of our proactive efforts. You know, sometimes a vehicle might not get reported, but we can recognize, some of the more obvious ones
Right.
that are proactive. So we're really trying to
Right.
increase our efforts. Hopefully we don't have to tow them. Hopefully they move.
Right.
Yeah,
voluntary compliance is always better.
it is. It is.
So the officers themselves, the police officers with the community-based oriented policing as a way of doing business, are actually really out in the neighborhood more. They're just not in the car cruising. They're going to make efforts to connect with the neighborhood, with the blocks, with the districts.
They do. So
Yeah.
so another thing that we did for community-oriented policing is we changed the way we deploy our resources.
Right.
In the past, we had a big list, and basically anybody that was working abandoned vehicles just grabbed the list and went out and kind of worked the streets randomly. Where now I have 4 community service officers in abandoned vehicles, and they each have beats that they're responsible for.
Right.
So what that does is that allows them to recognize the hot spots and where the problems are, where the repeat problems are, where we're having neighborhood issues, and they can really kind of get down to the root of the problem with that more consistent basis rather than just random
Right.
deployment. So what they're doing sometimes is they're talking to residents, they're passing out their business cards, they're letting people know how to report abandoned vehicles, and they're getting residents that will actually kind of flag them down, and they're reporting more issues on their block.
Right.
And that's what community policing is. It's the
Right.
police department working with the resident
Right.
to kind of solve their problems in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
So it's a good partnership.
Right. Co-producing the solution.
Yes.
All right. So if somebody has an abandoned vehicle, it's right on their street, and they know it's there, what's the best way for them to have a response by the police department?
So there's a couple different ways. They can still leave a voicemail message. We
Right.
still check that line daily. They can do that if they're not comfortable with technology. They can also go on cityofsalinas.org.
Right.
I think that's the best way, cityofsalinas.org, and then there's a prompt that says, report a problem or a service request. If they click on that, that actually gives them more options than the way Salinas Connect mobile app.
Okay.
Mobile app can be quicker,
Right.
but it doesn't have all the drop-down boxes that help us
Right.
do what we need. So Salinas Connect Mobile,
Right.
the first screen on there will be location, and
Okay.
the cool thing is it drops a pinpoint of where they are.
Ah.
Now, if they're not where the abandoned vehicle is, they can drag that pin to where it is, and then the next prompt will be kind of like a description
Right.
of what it is. But cityofsalinas.org will actually do the same thing, but with more detail.
Right. And they could actually send a picture through that app.
They can.
Right.
Yeah.
And they can do the same thing on the web?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
So salinas.org.
cityofsalinas.org.
Right. Okay.
Or download the Salinas Connect mobile app
Right.
for Android or iPhone.
Right. It sounds like that's a much better and more complete way than just leaving a voicemail.
It saves us a lot of time. It will save
Right.
them time in reporting, but it also get us out there faster.
Right. And then that way they can update, they can look at the request they made, they can see where it is and what's being done with it. And they can even update the information if the car you know, moved down the block or something, and it's, you know, been there for another 10 days.
Yes.
Right.
Another thing is sometimes we get multiple complaints on the same vehicle. So with Salinas Connect, we can link those complaints.
Right.
So now we're not investigating the same thing 4 times, which we were doing in the past.
Right.
Now we can link those complaints, so we're not duplicating our efforts.
Right. So some of the 7,000 plus requests for service on abandoned vehicles, is that also because there's more knowledge in Salinas Connect and other ways to communicate with the police about the problems in the neighborhoods? Are they taking more advantage of that now?
I think we're getting more complaints, I would say, for 3 different reasons. One, it seems like there's more vehicles parked on the street and it's getting more crowded. So as it gets more crowded, we get more complaints. Secondly, with Salinas Connect, it's easier to make reports. And I would guess that you're going to see this with all of the city departments that have Salinas Connect, is their complaint numbers are going to go up because it's easier.
Right.
And the third, I think, specific to AVs, is that as residents see that we're doing more, they see the response, they're reporting more.
Right.
If residents don't see any action on something, they're less likely to report it.
Right.
So they're actually seeing something done, and we're getting more reports, which is fine. We're not going to, we encourage it.
Yeah.
We'll find a way to make it work.
Right. I think of cooperation, as you said, like co-producing the solution with the neighborhoods. You know, some of that may eventually be, you know, prevention efforts, right? As opposed to just calling when there's a problem.
Yes.
You know, there's the community sets its own standard, if you will. They're not going to accept abandoned vehicles in their block or on their street or in their neighborhood.
That's correct.
So then it becomes a little more in terms of the community participating with the police to address the problem, as opposed to it's just an enforcement issue.
We might be the only person from the police department that resident comes in contact with, and we're part of the police department. And I think that our, the job that we do, whether it's good or bad, is going to reflect on the police department and ultimately the city. So we keep that in mind when we're out there interacting with people and trying to do the best job that we can do.
Well, it sounds like you've got a great program. You probably need more resources, but you have some technology to help you with the Salinas Connect application and on the web. And hopefully citizens will take advantage of that and really work with you and your unit to address these abandoned vehicle issues.
Yes, and I think one thing we haven't touched on, but I wanted to make sure I touched on was just the community service officers that are in this unit. I'm very proud of them. They do an amazing job. They have a difficult job.
Right.
The parking situation and towing people's cars, people get very emotional, and they have to deal with a lot of difficult situations every day.
Wow.
And they just do a great job. So.
You've got a great team, Kendall. We certainly appreciate it at City Hall, and we look forward to getting an update in the future. Any last words about the program or what you're attempting to accomplish? No,
I mean, we're just trying to get the word out about Salinas Connect and abandoned vehicles, so every chance we get. So I appreciate you having me to talk about this issue.
It's been a pleasure having you on the show. I'm sure our community and residents that are watching learned a little bit more, and they know they have an opportunity here to address some difficult issues in their neighborhood.
Yes.
Thanks again.
Thanks, Ray.